Welcome to the New School of Marketing podcast, the place for smart, simple strategies that will amplify your business results. Sharing practical tips, insider knowledge, and actionable advice because marketing is something that every business owner can do. Now, let's get started. Introducing your host, Bianca McKenzie, mum, lover of snow sports, camping, horse riding, and in-demand launch strategist and Facebook advertising knowledge bank.
Welcome to the New School of Marketing podcast. I'm Bianca McKenzie, and today I'm talking all about launching a podcast to amplify your business with Lyndal Harris. Lyndal is the founder of Podcast VA, and she manages a team that makes podcasting easier. She works with a number of Australian and international podcasters with audiences of hundreds of thousands of people. She reduces the stress and overwhelm that comes with project managing all of the different elements of your podcast by offering a variety of support services. Welcome to the podcast, Lyndal. This is really exciting.
Thank you so much for having me, Bianca.
So cool. All right. So for anyone who doesn't really know the answer to this, even though they're actually listening to one right now, what exactly is a podcast?
So a podcast is, it's known by different names. So some people might call it an audio blog or different names, but it's actually just a digital media file that's produced and published through platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and a whole host of other directories. So I guess the biggest difference and advantage is that listeners get to subscribe to a podcast or a show through their podcatcher so that every time a new episode is released, that gets delivered to their podcatcher. And just on a little side note there, the podcatcher is simply an app that you use to listen on your devices, such as your mobiles and your tablets. So if you have an iPhone, you have the little purple podcast app that comes native on the phone, or you might use Google Podcasts or Spotify, and there's a whole range of other apps out there as well. But yeah, every time a new episode is released, it gets delivered to that app. So you're not having to go back and check and see if there's a new show out.
Love it. It's so cool because, I was actually a blogger before I became a podcaster. So to hear you say it's basically it's like an audio blog in a way.
Yes.
It's a good way to describe
it's like
it.
The audio version of a blog. Exactly. A lot of people are using it like that. So yeah.
Super handy, right in your earbuds. I loved it when I had commutes and I listen on the train or I could listen in the car. It was really handy. I don't have a commute anymore, so
I was exactly the same. When I drove more, I listened to a lot more podcasts, but I moved and my commutes are a lot shorter as well. And I don't listen to as many. So that's a great point.
Maybe we just need shorter podcasts. There you go. There's an idea. So I love talking all about marketing. Can you explain why podcasting is actually a unique form of marketing?
Exactly what we just spoke about. So the biggest point of difference with a podcast over different other forms of content is that you can multitask while you're consuming it. And it's the only form of content you can really multitask while you're consuming. So some might say that you can listen to a video, but video apps often turn off, but you can't really watch a video while you're doing other things. And the statistics do show that most people are listening while they're doing other things. So they might be going and exercising, they might be on a walk or a run, they might be doing their housework, they're driving, they're on public transport, they're gardening, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's what really makes it a unique form from the other types of content.
Yeah, that's great. It's like we're competition with a radio station, I reckon.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't want to listen to the ads on radio. So I think a lot of people came to podcasting because they just got sick of listening to so many ads. And whilst it's not music, at least it's something that you're not it's being broken up with too many ads.
Yeah, and you can pick your own interests, I guess. There's so many different podcasts with so many different topics. You can either learn something.
That's right. Well, the educational and the entertainment style podcasts, I mean, they're absolutely going off. And I do often use this as an example because it shocked me when I started working with a client. It was a good few years ago now. And when they came to me with their idea, they were launching a podcast about exploring with their cat. So their cat in a backpack and going traveling with it. So not just putting it on a lead and walking. And I remember thinking, wow, that is a really, really niche topic. And it was amazing. They still do have their podcast, and they have a really, really engaged community around it. So literally, if you can find a podcast on exploring with a cat, you could pretty much find a podcast on whatever your hobbies and interests are.
That's crazy. I like it. Oh, no, I hadn't even thought about that. I love it. So, like I said before, I was a blogger first, and I did blogging for many, many years, like really a long time. And I didn't really have a plan. But since I started podcasting, I found that there are so many nuances and benefits. Can you walk us through some of the benefits of podcasting, like for a business as well as for a listener?
Yeah, absolutely. And oh gosh, there are quite a lot of benefits. So I'll run through quite a number of them. But I guess first and foremost, it's a really intimate way to consume content because, like you said before, you've got earbuds on or you've got headphones on or you're in the car and it's coming through the speakers, but you're talking directly to your audience. So it is a really intimate way to build that relationship. And not only are you building relationships, which is another benefit, not only with the audience, but also with the guests that you have on. So I have podcasters who literally their main objective of doing a podcast is to be able to reach out to people to come on their show as a guest that they might never be able to get in contact with unless they're trying to reach out through LinkedIn or other social media platforms. So that's another great benefit of it. It helps you communicate better. So I certainly know for me, when I first started with my podcast, I was, a little bit nervous and, just getting better at communicating and talking all the time. So I find it helps people become better speakers and get their message across. As I mentioned before, you've got the entertaining and the educational style. So you've got business podcasts and hobby podcasts. So it's a really great way to get your message out to many. So whether that is a business podcast or entertainment, or if you're trying to raise awareness about a certain thing, then it's a great way to get your message out to many without having to repeat the conversation over and over again. If you're a business, it's a great way to build your brand awareness and also build your credibility, put yourself in a place of being an expert in your particular field. What else have we got? It provides an alternative way to consume content. So, that in itself is a great benefit of it, because some people don't have the time to read, or some people might not like to read. They might not like to watch videos, and it's just providing that different way for them. And I think one of the biggest benefits that we might touch on a little bit later is repurposing your content. So you can really use it as a content creator and then use your podcast episode to repurpose other content to help with the marketing.
I love that. So many benefits. And to be honest, like I said, I had no plan when I started my podcast. I literally just went, I did blogging for so long. I was kind of getting a little bit bored of blogging. I was like, I'm going to do a podcast. And of all times to do it is like right in the middle of a pandemic with a 3-year-old, well, now 3-year-old, she was 2, 2-year-old at home. Anyway, it all worked out, didn't it?
Absolutely. And I think too, some people are better speakers than they are writers. And it takes longer for some people to sit down and write something than it does to put a microphone in front and record it. But obviously that's not everybody. Some people do prefer to write, but it does give that alternative.
Yeah, I love that in this day and age that we can just decide on whatever medium we want to use that suits us. And like it could be for a business or it could be for entertainment. Like there's so many ways that now we can use our voice and just have our say in the world. Like we don't have to wait, to be on talkback radio,
yes,
we have a little bit of control of that now. I think that's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, people go out there with different objectives of launching a podcast. It might be that it's a business podcast, and it might be that somebody can get 10,000 listens per episode, and it might be that someone gets 50 listens per episode. But if you're happy with that 50 listens, or people consuming your content, then that's a success and it's getting your message out there. So I think that's important to remember as well.
I think that's a really good point. And I kind of just went with the whole, I'm just going to give this a shot and see how it goes. And and I know that I'll need to give it some time. And that's with everything, really. Like, everything needs a bit of time. Can't do 3 episodes and think that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, everyone's
that's
heard
exactly
about
right. You want to kick into like 6 to 12 months and really sort of be consistent with it. And that's the way that you can start to really get a new audience.
Yep, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about content. I'm pretty sure you hear this too, but whenever I suggest content creation to people, they don't really know what to write or what to talk about. Do you have any tips on what topics to discuss?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is stories. So if you can weave, certainly so I'll talk here about from a business perspective, because most of my clients are business podcasters. Or podcasting as a marketing tool for their business. So stories and weaving stories into these conversations is a great way for you to get your value proposition across to people. So whether it's, obviously you would make them anonymous, but you could be telling case studies, you could be talking about conversations with clients and relaying that information out to people. You might think about, what do you get asked all the time? What are your frequently asked questions? Because if you've got that question, you frequently ask questions obviously a lot, but even when people ask you questions, jot them down and make an episode out of it. Because if someone's asking you that question, there's probably other people who want the answers to it as well. Because it's easy for us to fall into that trap of, we know what we know, but we don't know what others don't know. So, we might think, oh yeah, no, I won't do it. No one need to know about that, but that's not necessarily the case. So take note of the kinds of questions that people ask you and do episodes about that. List episodes are really, really popular. So it might be the top 10 ways to market your podcast, or top 5 ways to do this. So those list style posts are really popular. Interview other people in your field. So similar to what we're doing now, you've got a marketing podcast, like interview people and ask them questions, get their opinions on things. You might go to workshops and conferences, and you can do episodes on your learnings and takeaways from those workshops if they will help your audience as well. Another good idea is to take into account current events. So, what's happening in the news, is it relevant? Could you weave in, for example, COVID information or COVID style stories into your episodes? And I think another great idea to make sure that you have a really engaged audience is to ask the audience for ideas. So when you're doing your marketing, whether that's through Instagram stories or Facebook posts or LinkedIn posts, or even sending out an email and surveying your audience, ask what they want to hear about, because then you know that they're invested to listen, because they've actually given you the topics that they want to hear about. So that's one to always keep in mind.
So many good tips here. Like, I can definitely take some of these too. So
good. Great. That's great.
I basically opted for a bit of a blended mode, because I was like, I don't really want to do solo episodes all the time, and I really love speaking to other people and learning from them, and I know that my audience does too. So I was like, you can mix them, right?
You can mix them. And actually, that's a great point, because the mix of interviews and case studies or conversations with clients and solo episodes is really, really popular at the moment. And I always go back to ask the question of, what is the main objective, or what are the objectives of your podcast? So if somebody says to me, the main objective is to build brand awareness and to build myself as the expertise, as the authority in this space, then I would always say, make sure you have solo episodes weaved into some interviews if that's the plan. Don't do all interview shows if that's your objective, because what happens is you're more often than not shining the light on other people and not communicating your experience. So, however, if your sole goal of the podcast or objective of the podcast is so that you can build relationships with the people that you're asking onto your show, then you might not want to do so many solo episodes, and your benefit will be having more interviews because it's allowing you to reach out and build those relationships. So the mix, as I say, works really, really well and is really popular at the moment of solo and interview shows.
Yeah. I had to, I have to admit, part of the reason of doing a mix as well is because I absolutely love doing the interviews, but they are very time consuming, I find. And it's, even though I know lots of people want to be podcast guests, it's not always easy to find them and coordinate getting them on. So mixing it with my solo episodes is easy, you know, like it's easy for me to do a solo episode. It's like, I don't need anyone here. I can just do this in my own time. And yeah, like it really helps with building that authority as well. Like even though this is a marketing podcast, I still want to be known as the person for Facebook ads. So I am going to talk about Facebook ads and tell people, you know, teach them certain things. So the mix is twofold in like, it's
absolutely. And you know, you can batch when it comes to your solo shows too. So that's always a good way to get ahead. And if an interview ever falls over, you can always slot it in with a solo show, and your clients, so your audience aren't necessarily going to be listening thinking, oh, that's odd that there's not an interview this week. So yeah,
it definitely makes it easier. And I stalled for so long on starting a podcast, and in the end I was just like, no, I'm going to make this work. I'll just do it my own way. And so far it's working. So I totally launched it on a whim and like literally on a whim with a 2-year-old, like in a heavy lockdown last year. And I'm sure I missed something important along the way, but maybe you can tell us, can share with the listeners the steps to launch a podcast. Like, I'm sure I missed some, but I just thought, I'm just going to do this. So if someone wanted to launch a podcast.
I'm sure you did them all, but
maybe.
I usually break it down into 10 steps. So I just want to have a little disclaimer here before I go into the steps to launch your podcast, because what I do find is that I'll speak to clients or I'll see in my Facebook group that people have Googled a whole lot of different ways to how to launch their podcast, and they might find one article on something that talks them through one step, and then they'll have YouTubed a video on something else. And there are different ways to do things. So you might have one person telling you to do it this way, and then they'll look at a video that says do it another way, and it can be really, really confusing. So what I would say is, if you are looking for some guidance on how to launch a podcast, go and find one person's resource, whether it's training, whether it's a step-by-step guide, and follow that through, because you'll know that process will get you from start to finish, and there shouldn't be any confusion along the way with different ways to do things. So that would be my advice there.
I love that disclaimer, because there is so much information out there, and I think maybe that's part of what stopped me from launching a podcast for a while, because it's like, oh my God, there's like so much to do. But no, there isn't. There is a bit to do, but like all the information is just confusing. So, all right.
There is a bit to do, and it feels like you've got this massive mountain to climb, but once you break it down, it's fairly straightforward. And the thing with launching your podcast is you do all of these tasks in the launch process that you don't then need to do in your weekly or fortnightly ongoing process. So it is a little bit different with the launch, and then you can get into a rhythm or a quite a systemized process as you're going into your ongoing episodes. So that makes it a little bit easier.
It does.
So step one, the first thing I would suggest is that you create a strategy. Know your strategy, know why you're launching your podcast before you just jump in and do it. So with your strategy, you need to be thinking about what is your objective? Why are you launching the podcast? You know, who is it for? Who's your audience? Are they listening to podcasts? What type of information are you going to share? So what's the message that you're sharing with the world? So to have that strategy in mind, and then that will help you filter a lot of the other things through that strategy. If you've got questions coming up, should I talk about this? Should I talk about that? You can always go back to your strategy and be like, okay, well, the objective of it is this. And yes, that fits into that. So that would always be my first step, rather than a lot of people will be like, okay, I need to go and get the equipment, or I need to get a microphone. Just slow down a little bit, go back and work out that strategy piece first. The next one is choosing your podcast title and tagline. So when it comes to the title, there's a few different ways that you can name your podcast. You might decide that you want to name it after your personal brand. So you might call it the Lyndal Harris podcast, which there isn't one, by the way. But if that was my personal brand, I might call it after myself.
Yeah.
The other way is to name it after your keywords or perhaps your business or a course that you have that aligns with the branding. So when I talk about keywords, my podcast is called Podcasting Tips and Tricks because it tells people exactly what they're going to hear about when they listen to my show. So then there's no question about what they're listening to. The third way to do it is a slightly quirky name, like it might be a fun and quirky title, but just be mindful that there are over 1 million podcasts in the directories now, and people are not going to go in and type in the search engine your quirky name unless they've heard of it directly. So they're not going to find it through search. If you do go for that quirky name, I don't say that it's not a bad way to name it, but make sure you have a clear tagline with a couple of keywords in it that will make it obvious what that show is about.
Yeah.
The other thing with titles is go into the directory. So go into Apple Podcasts and Spotify and also just Google the name of the show so that you can see if anybody else has got that podcast title. The directories will actually approve you. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everyone will approve your show. They're not looking to see if it's got the same title as someone else, but you might find that it confuses the audience a little bit if there's 2 or 3 podcasts with the same name. So make sure you have a look at that. Yes. And if someone's got trademark on it, they will shut you down. They will come and tell you to change it. So it just saves you a little bit of hassle down the line. Creating your cover art. When you create your cover art, you have to have specific dimensions. It needs to be 1400 by 1400 up to 3000 by 3000 pixels. Otherwise, Apple Podcasts and some of the other directories won't approve it. So just be really mindful. I think a lot of us can jump into Canva and go, yep, the 800 by 800 will be fine. And then when you go to send it through to get approved, you can't work out why it hasn't been approved. So it's really, they want those really sort of specific dimensions.
Yep.
When it comes to your artwork.
I was going to say at the same time, those dimensions are really big on the screen, but they're really tiny.
Yes.
Which is probably exactly what you're going to
say. I'm coming to that part next because that is exactly right. When you think about the design of your cover art, you don't want to have too much on there because when people are looking at it, it's a thumbnail. So on your screen, it's huge. It's like, I could put the title and the tagline and the author and I can but when you're looking at it on a phone, it's tiny. So just something that's really minimal that pops is really good. You think about whether you want to have your image on the cover or whether you just want to just have it as a word cover. But if you're doing a business podcast, my suggestion too is that this is a good place to sort of bring that branding into it. So if you've got certain brand colors, fonts, things like that, then bring that into the cover art so that it flows through.
Good point.
The next step is to write your podcast description. Now, with your description, it is a really it's a really interesting when you go and look in the podcast directory. Some people put lots and lots of information in there and some people will put one sentence. And I would always say to you, this is the perfect place to weave in keywords. Don't keyword stuff because they won't prove it, but weave in keywords, make it really clear what is the podcast about and who is it for, because there was a report that was done last year. It was either last year or the end of the year before, and people do actually read the description if they're looking for a new show. So it's really important to put something in there that they're going to read and understand. I see lots and lots of people just put a throwaway 1 or 2 sentences in there, and it's a real waste of that real estate. So make sure you put something in there that really describes it and it's got some keywords in there. The next step is creating your intro and outro. So you want to find some music. I always suggest that you should have an intro and outro. Find the music. Again, find something that's going to fit in with your branding if it is a business podcast or something that your audience are going to listen to. So I hear quite often music to a podcast that doesn't align to the audience, and you think, okay, well, that might be what the host loves to listen to, but that doesn't really that's not what is going to appeal to my audience. And there's a real disconnect when, you might hear this really big rock song and then you're going into something that's so I've produced a podcast for someone before where the audience were sort of younger females, and yet the music was really, really heavy rock in the intro, and there was such a disconnect for me, and I couldn't understand why that was chosen. So be mindful of that. And again, if it's a business podcast, it's part of your branding. So if rock music and that is part of your branding and it fits, fine. But if it doesn't, then just be mindful of that, because those first four or steps from the podcast title, the cover art, the description, and the intro and outro, it's all part of branding your podcast. So those are the first sort of few steps of it. The next steps are thinking about your podcast microphone. What equipment do you need? What platforms are you going to be recording on? How are you going to record? So it's not till like the sixth step that I'm going through here that I would say start thinking about your microphone. So a lot of people will think of it as number one, like let's go and buy a microphone. And I would always go through those first steps. First, make sure you've got it all outlined. Then you want to think about, look, a lot of people will say, or some people might say, you need to go and spend $800 to $1,000 to get your equipment and get it set up and have a really professional setting. But I really just discourage you from doing that. I don't think you need to do that at all. If you have no budget, you could use the headphones that come with your phone that have the little microphone on it. If you do use that, just be mindful that it might rub on a collar or on a shirt or something like that, but that will provide you with good quality audio.
Yeah, I love that you're saying this, because I'm just sitting here laughing because I didn't have anything.
Oh, didn't you? Okay, so
I had the headphones.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've got that there, like that is clear enough. I would suggest that as a minimum. I don't think using the default mic on your computer really provides a good quality, or even on your phone.
Yeah.
So I would go with that as a minimum. If you have a little bit of a budget, then I would suggest a USB microphone. And there are some amazing USB microphones out there that you can buy for $100, $200. You don't have to go up into the $500-$600 sort of brackets.
Yeah, which is what I have now. I have upgraded, but I started with my Apple headphones.
Absolutely. Good on you, because that's the other thing is a lot of people start and then decide that podcasting isn't for them. And so you don't want to have gone and spent $1,000 on all this equipment that you then have to learn how to use. Like a USB microphone is generally plug and play. So before you buy a microphone though, think about where you're going to be recording. So is the room you're recording in, has it got carpet? Has it got curtains or blinds? Is it fairly sort of low ceiling? Or is it a tiled living room that's, tiled with lots of glass walls and sort of windows and doors and what have you, and high ceilings, because that's going to create a lot of reverb. And before you choose your microphone, you want to know if you're going to be in a room that has a lot of that echoey sound that's naturally part of it. There's a couple of different types of microphones you can buy. So there's a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone. And before you go and choose that microphone, know how you're going to record. Other people will be out and on the road and recording, talking to people, so they'll want something that's portable. So thinking about what you're recording before you do that. As far as platforms are concerned, if you're using a Mac, you could use GarageBand, which comes native on your computer, or you might download a free recording and editing program called Audacity, which is Audacity. And you can record your solo pieces on those software platforms. Interviews, you might choose to use Zoom. There's Squadcast and Zencaster are two others as well, but they are audio only at this stage, so there's no video with that. But I do find that a lot of people still use Zoom because everybody knows it.
Yes, so especially now.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's used it now. So look, Zencaster and Squadcast will give you a slightly better audio quality than Zoom, but it's much of a muchness. They're paid platforms as well. I think Zencaster has a small free plan, but choose your equipment and your software. Another piece of software that you might want to download is called Auphonic, which is AUPHONIC, and that will it can just polish the final part of your audio editing. So you might edit it in your program, add your intro and outro, and then run it through Auphonic. It will set it to the right LUFS for your podcast volume. It will level any difference between your host and guest. And yeah, it's just and it'll add your ID3 tags. You can set up presets, etc., with using that program. So it's just a nice thing to run and just polish that audio off when you've finished editing it.
Great.
The last 3 steps, we've got 3 more. Step 8 is to create your hosting account. So you might use someone like Anchor, you might use Podbean, Buzzsprout, Omni Studio, Whooshka. There's so many different podcast hosts.
Yep.
And they come at different prices. So again, know your budget, have a look around and see what stats they offer, because the biggest difference between the price points will be the statistics that you can get from them.
Yep.
The next step is submitting your podcast to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, and all of the other directories. So they're the big 4 ones that you definitely want to be on. And then there's a whole host of other directories that you can submit your podcast to as well. The way podcasting works is that you set up your hosting account, you set up your show in your host, and then you upload your show every time you want to put out a new episode. And then that pushes out to the directories that you have integrated. So Apple Podcasts and Google, et cetera. And then the last step in launching your podcast is have a marketing plan. Like if you've got a website, if it's a business and you've got a website, make sure it's on the website, and then have a bit of a plan on how you're going to market that show and that launch.
Yep.
And that's it. That's the 10 steps that I usually take people through.
It's a lot of steps, but honestly, the majority of them you do at the start. It's a lot of work at the start, I found, but then after, once it's all set up, once you've got your host and you've got your strategy and your title, and you don't have to do that art all the time, and you only do your intro and outro once, or maybe you can review it after a while. But
yes,
I found the hardest bit was just actually getting started rather than overthinking all of the things that I needed. That's why I just went with my Apple headphones, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm good. I'm just going to do it. Done's better than perfect. I can overthink this for years.
I agree.
Really.
And it's the type of thing that you get better as you go. Just start and then learn along the way and get better as you go. You hear podcasters like Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, they all say, like, oh, don't go back and listen to my first show. If you do, it's hilarious, because they started somewhere as well and they got better along the way. Yeah. So every podcaster will just be like, oh God, don't go and listen to my first few shows. Yep. But that's part of the process for a lot of us, is like start and learn along the way, and you'll also get better along the way.
Exactly. Practice. Done's better than perfect was my take. And here we are.
Definitely.
Episode 35. So we're getting there.
It does sound like there's a lot of steps to what I just went through, but a lot of it is just, sit down and just, work it out. Like the description and the title and the tagline might only take you sort of 10, 15 minutes or half an hour. So it sounds like a lot of steps, but once you break it down, it's pretty straightforward.
Yes, definitely. And I got stuck on the whole or like editing and all of that. And I know that if you can't do it, or you don't want to do it, you don't want to learn it, there's always Lyndal. Someone can take over from you.
There is. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Some people don't necessarily want to get into the editing and the bits and pieces of it, but there's plenty of people that you can outsource to get that help. Absolutely.
Yeah. So many handy tools available and people that can help you. So any other sort of podcast tips and tricks that people might not have thought about? Can you share anything, like any insider knowledge?
Tips and tricks. Look, I have probably quite a few, but I'm going to share 2, I think, today, because one, I think 95% of podcasters will come across, and that is imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. It is amazing how many people get stuck in the fear of imposter syndrome, myself included. Like I had that whole, like, why would I do another podcast? As I went to launch my podcast, because I did launch it quite late. It was a couple of years after I'd started Podcast VA. And after, just as I was about 3 other Australian podcasters started a podcast about podcasting, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, do I do this? Why would people listen to me? And I don't know if I want to put myself out there. What if I say things differently? And I did have that massive imposter syndrome. And the only way to get over it is to push through it and just rip the Band-Aid off and go for it, because otherwise you will literally, I have seen people not launch a show because they're so stuck in the fear of imposter syndrome, and there is no way out of it. Just keep going, just push through it, because once you get your first few episodes out, it's like, actually, you know what? I'm okay. This is okay.
Yeah.
And, I think I got a couple of 1-star reviews. I was like, oh gosh, people hate me. And it's like, oh, who cares? Like, don't worry about it.
I haven't even looked at them.
Don't know that. Yeah. Well, and it's weird. It's like, you don't know that. They don't leave you any tips to get, like, it's just a 1-star. And I'm like, at least give me some feedback.
Some words. Yeah.
So it's just a matter of just starting it. If you want to do one, don't worry about the imposter syndrome. It will start to get less as you just push through it and start and get some episodes under your belt. But the other tip that I have is a really practical one that people who are podcasting or thinking about launching a podcast, and that is that repurposing side of things.
Yeah.
Like, if you've got a podcast, you don't need to worry about what your blog is going to be about for that week, or even what will I talk about in my email marketing. Like, you tie it all in together. So, for example, we'll talk about this episode where you're talking about podcasting. So your show notes, which are going to be different to a transcript, and not everyone has a transcript, by the way. I'm not suggesting that you need one, but they're just 2 ways that you can use your episodes. So your show notes is to entice people to click on the show and listen. So you're not giving all of the information. A transcript is literally a transcript of the interview or the episode.
Yep. That
is giving someone a different way to consume the content. There's social media posts and graphics. So for your next couple of weeks, you've got some posts. You might pull quotes out of it. You might have some audiograms, the little teaser videos that you can share on your social media as well. You might turn it into a blog. So turn the podcast episode into a blog and expand on it. You can use it as your email marketing. So if you do a weekly show, you might take your show notes, repurpose them into your email that you send out to your email list every week or every time you release a new episode. Some people like to do it each time. Some might send a summary sort of once a month and say, these are the 4 episodes that have gone out this month. So that's, obviously personal choice.
Yep.
You've got infographics. So if you've done one of those list style episodes where it's the top 10 ways to market your podcast, you might do an infographic on that. You can repurpose webinars and presentations into podcasts. You can do lead magnets, ebooks, videos, all sorts of things. And when we talk about repurposing, you can repurpose your podcast into any of those things, but you can also repurpose a lot of those things into a podcast episode. So you might have a lead magnet that'd be like, actually, I could talk about this as a podcast episode, or I've just done this presentation, which is a fantastic presentation. I can snip up and make a podcast episode. So there's just so many different, and that's just sort of touching on the surface of how you can repurpose your content so that your podcast sort of fits into that whole content marketing sphere really nicely.
I love it. I'm sitting there going, mind blown. Like, I do some of these, but there's definitely room for improvement and sort of expansion. And I've only just started handing over some of these things to my team. So I'm going to add some of these things to their task list.
Oh, nice.
Because we can definitely do some more repurposing. And that's the beauty of it. And it, like, even episodes from like last year, we still pushed them out through socials. We still pushed them out through email marketing because, there's people that haven't seen it yet, haven't read it yet, haven't listened to it. So
absolutely. And if it's evergreen, there's absolutely no reason not to. So that's a good idea.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I love that.
No.
And I also loved your tip about the imposter syndrome. It took me ages to launch my podcast.
Yep.
50 million marketing podcasts, I think. I don't even know how many, but there's heaps of them. So I was like, why me? And my other thing that kept holding me back was that I am not a native Australian speaker or English speaker. English is my second language. And I was like, no, I can't do this. Even though people can't tell that I'm not.
No.
But it just, kept holding me back, going, no, I'm not quick and I'm not witty and I can't like think on my feet that. And I was like, no, I will not be able to do that if I don't practice it. So yeah, honestly, everyone has these obstacles of fear of visibility and being, well, not seen but heard, and just do it. Just do it.
So true. So true. And the other thing is, if someone jumps on your website and they're looking for a few different, they're looking at a few different marketing or Facebook ad specialists, and they see that you've got a podcast, they can listen to you, and they probably will listen as they're doing their research. And it's like, you know what, I really like the sound of Bianca and I'm going to go with her. It can be something that pushes them over the line. So whilst it might be harder to find a bigger audience when you launch now, it certainly is very different from when people launched 4 or 5 years ago, because there are so many more podcasts now. But that doesn't mean to say that you're launching to go find this whole new audience. It might just be that it's a way that people get to know you if they're looking to work for you or looking for someone to work with. So there's so many different reasons to do it and not get stuck on that imposter syndrome.
Exactly. And you know what I've found as well along the way? That it's actually fun. Like I said earlier on, I was getting a bit bored with blogging. Podcasting is fun. It's great. Like I get to share my knowledge, but I also get to talk to so many people, and it's just amazing to, I don't know, like I have this passion of helping people with marketing and sharing not just my knowledge but other people's knowledge too. So it's fun. Just so anyone who's thinking about starting a podcast, just do it. It's amazing.
Absolutely. I agree. But know your strategy first.
Yes. Don't just do it. All right. Well, that's kind of the end of the podcast. I always have a few more questions. And one of them is, what are you curious about right now?
I love this question. And it's my answer might be a little different to some people's, but I'm actually in the process of starting a new business at the moment. And I'll be talking to a lot of people who have been diagnosed with terminal illness. So I guess if I'm curious and very nervous, I'm going to say, is just to learn what people feel and think about life and death. So
that's a big one.
Yes, very, very curious. It is a big one, yeah.
And yes, curiosity and probably also fascination. And I have looked a little bit at that business that you're starting, and I'm actually really keen to see how that sort of progresses, because I lost both of my opas, both of my grandfathers last year, not due to COVID. But I know that you're sort of looking more into telling the stories. And we had a lot of conversations with one of my opas about his life story, and just sort of looking back on big moments, and I'm really grateful that we had those conversations and that he shared some of his life with us, because he was a teenager in World War II, because I grew up in the Netherlands. So just hearing these stories from him, and very fascinating. And I'm kind of sad that I didn't get to have that with my other opa. He unexpectedly had a heart attack, so we didn't really have any of those stories. But I'm really sort of keen to see how your business goes in that direction, because it's important to talk about that.
It is. It
incredibly
absolutely
important.
Is.
So
yes, I agree totally.
And not just old people. I've also lost one of my best friends lost her husband due to a rare form of cancer. So left some little children behind, and did do some video recordings. That's my driver. That my husband passed away 2.5 years ago, and my kids were 8 and 10, and they don't know his life story. The childhood, or where did you go to school, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's definitely the driver behind it. Yep. Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds, because it's a really special kind of, I don't know, project for you, I guess. And I'm really curious and excited for you about that too.
Thank you.
All right. And if you had an extra $1,000 in your marketing budget, what would you spend it on?
Oh my gosh, this one I kind of hold my head in shame, because I'm like, Oh, there's so much I could spend it on because I'm very inconsistent with my marketing and my just even outsourcing my social media. To get help with social media is what I'm going to say there, but there is so much I could spend it on.
We need a bigger marketing budget. And honestly,
yeah, absolutely.
I am the builder who hasn't built their own house. I'm like, I can do all the marketing for, everyone else. But when it came to my own business, I was struggling in terms of consistency. So I only recently
so much easier
bit the bullet to hand it over to someone else. So I'm totally hearing you there.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's the end of this week's show. If you have any questions about starting a podcast, head to podcastva.com. I'll put it in the show notes too. A really big thanks to you, Lyndal. I really loved having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. That was great.
Awesome. And thanks to you for listening. If you like the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you heard the podcast. Your review will help others find the show and learn more about the amazing world of online marketing. And don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at newschoolofmarketing.com, where you can learn more about Lyndal, check out useful links, download free resources, and leave a comment about the show.